Am I really saying that this billion-dollar worth record-breaking, critically and commercially acclaimed AAA game from one of the industry's biggest names is underrated? Yes, I am. Apex Legends has quickly become one of my favorite multiplayer games of the past several years. Part of me is still shocked as to how good this game is, and how such a great and unexpected surprise its launch and consequent updates has been in terms of quality. It was surprising because nobody was really talking about it. To say nobody would definitely be a lie, but I do feel like Apex, if not underrated, is severely under-discussed in the overall gaming space, seeing just how above average and above good a lot of decisions are in here in terms of gameplay, of presentation, of video gaming.
Enemy down.
However, opposing what I just said, I also do understand why people would not give it much thought. There are a lot of things which can muddy the first impression of this game. Being one of the main golden gooses from the vile Electronic Arts of all companies, being part of the infamous Battle Royale genre, its relationship and competition with its rivals, and being spin-off of one of the most beloved and unfairly treated shooters of the past decade towards Salt to the Wound. In this review of mine, I want to talk about Apex Legends in its entirety, as a game, as a sport, as a product, as a piece of art, and why I feel, even after its many turbulences and problems, still is one of the greatest multiplayer experiences I've ever had in the medium. Before anything, I have to talk about the appeal of Battle Royales. If you guys were very into gaming culture in 2018 or such, I imagine you might remember just how much attention the genre was getting at the time. After the enormous success of PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds and the cataclysmic popularity of Fortnite, it seemed like everyone wanted to have a piece of the hot new thing in the market that was BR. And the reason why the genre took off, in my perspective, came in its unmatched sense of freedom and stakes. Due to the amount of RNG and amount of liberty this genre usually gives you, there is this sense that everything, and almost literally everything, can happen in a match of BR. You may play a whole match in one or two locations because everyone decided to hot drop and come at the same place at the same time, or you'll be a loot goblin, filling your butt with resources and traveling the land. You may be terrorizing the whole map and killing everyone who comes near you, or you will stumble and die. And the stakes in BR feels much bigger than any other multiplayer game, because dying here means dying in real life. I mean, coming back to the lobby. If you die in the match, you die in that match. You're gone. And with that sense of unpredictability that comes with the freedom, every action feels so much more impactful and satisfying. Defeating a bunch of people in one single match or winning that match knowing that you were of great help to achieve it is top 5 feelings of any game ever. You know that feeling when you defeat a hard boss? Multiply it by 5. I think it's just how good it feels, really. But, as you probably know it is not 100% all fun and games all of the time. And the reason why the genre fell off, in my perspective, came in its unmatched frustration due to its freedom and stakes. The amount of RNG/luck that every match is filled with significantly changes the outcome of the battles. Sometimes you lose a fight just because you dropped with a weak weapon while your opponent dropped with a very good one, or sometimes the opponent just has a better position in relation to the ring compared to you, and there's not much you can do to oppose that. The stakes are high, meaning that losing or playing not as well as you would like to be doing feels much more bothersome and damaging to your morale, simply because you'll be wasting so much time and effort to be just vanished to wins in seconds. And that is where I think the popularity of BR became the genre's biggest enemy. If it was a moderately popular niche, like a card game for example, it would be fine, but its explosion in popularity came unwelcoming attention. With this rush to participate in the market, a lot of different publishers pushed a lot of different studios to make their own battle royale games. And I personally believe that a lot of those studios didn't have the budget, the time, or just the skill to make a good BR game, and that was the majority of the titles at the time. Which is when Respawn Entertainment falls in. Stand by for Titanfall! Being the experienced studio when it comes to FPS that they are, they seem to take their time to understand the strengths and weaknesses of the genre and create something truly special. And I think three of the biggest contributors, the backbones of Apex Legends if you will, is the TTK, the team-based gameplay, and the ping system. Let's talk about them. TTK, for those who are not aware, is the acronym to Time to Kill, which is a term used mostly on FPS games relating to the time in average that it takes to kill an enemy player, including the damage, the time to load the gun, the reaction time, etc. etc. TTK, for at least the most popular FPS titles, is usually low to match with the more frenetic run and gun styles of some of the most popular games of the market. And even though I'm not the biggest fan of low TTKs, I still understand the appeal and why it works in the way it does. However, when the Battle Royale games started to come out, I felt that they were translating these types of FPS games to literally to this other genre, which resulted in they feeling awkward and frustrating because you could waste minutes upon minutes looting and exploring deserted locations just when you finally find a challenger, the fight itself takes less than a minute to be complete. Let's suppose that in average, if a battle royale matches the duration of this video up until this point, the fight would be over by now. This has always been, for me, one of BR's biggest weaknesses. The time, the contrast between the noise and the silence is not well balanced at all, which can make some matches really boring. So I don't know if it was just pure skill and experience after years on this market, or if they just had more time to reflect and develop what their idea should be, but Respawn then decided to extend the overall length of a team fight to better pay off the moments of peace that came before it. Consequently, the TTK in Apex Legends is decently high. Everyone is a damage sponge, as uncultured people would say. And personally, even though this decision affects a lot of elements in the game in both good and bad ways, I think this change is mostly positive. So, usually the games with low TTK were a lot more about prediction, meaning that if you're going to take a decision to make an action, you should have already predicted what the enemy would be and how would they respond. Meaning that any small delay or mistake in your part will result in death. And that is just fine in games where all things function really quickly, though personally it can really get on my nerves. But that is not the case in Apex. If you, for example, are taken by surprise and starts a team fight with low health, with good positioning, good use of the tools you have, and the bonus of teamwork, which is a bonus because I know 80% of this fan base does not actually play with teamwork in mind, you can quite easily revert the situation. Apex is more about the consistent engagement, of continually taking good decisions and landing good shots, and the team that makes that more wins. And I honestly really like this. Even if that speed and snappiness of low TTK games is fun, I just prefer having these prolonged fights in which I'm constantly tested and have a bigger chance to turn the situation to my favor rather than, oh, I didn't think there would be a guy there. I immediately died with a blink of an eye. Especially in such a punishing environment as BR. The longer TTK is also assisted by the team-based gameplay. Apex Legends is also a team-based hero shooter game. It's literally the second half of the game, pretty much. First, just connecting to the prior team, having teammates at your side will allow battles to last longer. However, more importantly, they make the game more engaging and unpredictable, because with the longer TTK, the team dynamics, the abilities of each character, and the long interactable arenas of BR adds a bunch of layers to every single fight in your match. There are so many things that can happen in battle in this game, depending on the place, depending on your team, depending on your loadout, that accentuates that appeal of BR, of unpredictability and uniqueness of every match, and how it gives life and replayability to this genre. And I personally believe that Apex is balanced enough to not make those fights frustrating nor by making you dependent on your teammates. Obviously, sometimes it happens, it sucks. Every time you play a team game, there will always be that guy. But having one guy killing an entire squad is not even surprising in this game anymore. And I do like that a lot. Apex balances really well the importance of your team and the importance of yourself, and that's really cool. R99 here. What is also pretty cool is the ping system.
Thanks, beautiful.
Happy to help, friend. Ping is such a good idea with such a good execution that it's kinda crazy I've never seen any big game do something similar to it before. Only press of a button you can point to a place on the map, or specifically in this case, in your landscape on your vision, and notify your team that you guys should be going somewhere or doing something. There's also a whole list of actions you can use, like I'm going along there, I'm attacking here, I'm defending this place, I'm looting over there. With this, you have a good communication with your teammates, cutting a lot of the toxicity that usually came with it. In a press of a button, you mute all players before you enter a match, while you can still strategize and point things to them. I cannot express how much I miss this feature every time I play any other multiplayer game. These are what I consider to be the fundamentals of Apex design, which does not mean that these elements are unique to it or infallible. There will be times where you're going to die quickly with a bad team with a lack of communication. There are other games which Apex was inspired by or inspired that has some of these elements in a way that you may prefer. But what makes this the excellent game I think it is how it added and polished these ideas to the Battle Royale genre in a way that accentuates its biggest strengths and make it consistently fun. Consistently fun being the keyword. I just think Apex is more engaging and much more fun than many of its contemporaries. not only because of the solid base they created, but also how they built upon it. So let's change subjects for a bit. Let's talk about the world of Apex Legends. I think Apex Legends looks great. Okay, not in the way that you would expect, I guess. Well, yes, my footage comes from the PlayStation 4 share functionality, which doesn't make the game justice, but even at its full glory, I would say Apex is not a graphically impressive game. It's not very clean, crisp, and generally good looking. And I think that's exactly what makes it great visually. Apex Legends looks rough, dirty, harsh reds and cold blues, robotic but with a banded punk-like attitude. Apex constantly works with contrasts, with combining opposite colors, of making beautiful things and throwing them on that old pool of mud. It feels like every texture here is a 720p image stretched and compressed just enough to not look impressive. And it's this nastiness that I find it so attractive. I think you can see the marvelous art direction of Apex in its 4 current maps. Kings Canyon, the game's first ever map, is such an iconic level for me. In universe, the Apex games is a blood sport, watched by millions of people throughout the galaxy, and I think KC expresses that really well. The dark green, ugly forests, the awkward mountains, the long dry deserts, the rough looking buildings, and especially those immense banners and their quantity drives the feeling of the sociopathic game. Olympus is the strike contrast. It's a recently evacuated flying city of the rich. It's basically a place where no crime has ever happened. Or so they want you to believe. It feels disgusting on its cleanness, just like rich people. Storm Point, the most recent map of the recording of this video, have this really nice balance of paradisiac, relaxing forests and oceans, with beaches and natural life, but also with this hard, brutalist-like military bases, with its blue sky almost being interrupted by a dark storm. And World's Edge, the game's most popular map, is kind of a noisy mix of everything: the pale snow and the bright lava, the gaming-like buildings and the genuine space stations to make WE the perfect balance of everything up to this point. All of them have that grid, but also have that awe. It's always so cool to see those big buildings at the distance. It kinda creates this hype mid-match to explore them. Now, I guess if we're talking about the level design itself, how these maps are structured and how they work on a mechanical level, I would say that all of them are fun or at the very least acceptable, but I do feel like none of them are perfect or exceptional due to the fact that there are so many layers happening in one BR match that balancing them can be difficult. For example, Kings Canyon is now considered as some sort of black sheep among the fanbase. And while I do understand where those criticisms are coming from, I still like that map very much. Its noticeable feature is that it is small, made for you to find enemies quicker, and it does that job really well, to the point that I think it's a great map for beginners in Apex Legends. But making it small also make it perfect for the infamous third party, where a third team comes to interfere the fights that you are having with another. And it is so hard to actually win when a third party happens. You need to be really skilled and have a lot of luck at your side. And its short length facilitates those happening in KC. I also noticed that, for some reason, this map barely has loot. My main is literally someone who focuses on getting items and ammo, and I still feel very unprepared every time I play on that map. but I still find it very enjoyable and very iconic, as I mentioned. World's Edge is in fact the best one of all. It's not the perfect, but it's the closest to hit that sweet spot in balancing its length and traversal with fun places to battle and a good loot pool. Oh, and I don't mind Fragment all that much. I like the fact that you have this populated place that was built almost with a Call of Duty deathmatch or free-for-all mentality in mind, and becomes this chaotic fight for over a single item. I think it's fun. The problem in WE, I feel it's the way how the bus works. I feel like the bus is always designed to go towards the middle of the map in this game, and seeing how big Fragment is and how it is in the middle of the map, it just so usually ends up being the only place where you can go to have an early fight, as everywhere else seems empty. I think they should improve a little bit how the bus work and make it have more distinct directions, I don't know. Olympus is okay. Its biggest strength is that it is the map with the biggest quantity of points of interest in the game, so it has a lot of really cool places to land and explore, but it is a little bit too big and it can be boring. And Stormpoint is Olympus but even worse, as it is bigger but with not a lot of POIs and a very tricky and linear way of mobility. I like them, I think they're fine, but I would prefer if they were smaller and had more ways to move around. But in general, they are not perfect, but making BR maps is very tricky in nature, so I think they are very much serviceable and fun, especially with the gameplay that surrounds it and the people who live in it. Or I guess die in it. The castle looks just as nasty as the levels themselves. It's funny how the name of the game is Apex Legends. However, these guys don't really feel like memorable legendary heroes. They're mercenaries. Anyways and anyhows, I freaking love the cast of Apex. They're among some of my favorite playable characters in any game ever. There is this unspoken rule in character design where you have to make sure that the looks of the character create a noticeable first impression, that it manages to tell the personality and gameplay of the character and a little bit of their story as well. The Apex cast first impression can be really mild. You see their over-designed attire, their obvious character personalities and quirks, and their sort of lack of any iconography and just feel underwhelmed by them. However, I think their appeal comes in a subtle way, which is kind of rare for games like this. For example, you start really loving these guys when you start paying attention to their dialogue.
I believe in art. And pinball. I love pinball.
Like, some lines in this game are genuinely funny and I find it to be very witty or just fun to listen to. Some of my favorites are
Let's show these fools why their parents never loved them.
is only one of 100 iconic Rampart quotes,
I'm the jump master. Time to make some jaws drop.
because LOBA can make a crevasse in your head, also because of her crevasse.
Last one down, a boom boom.
Is both pretty cool and pretty cute, which is a good way to represent the lifeline.
Something wrong with your head if you fight me.
You know, because there's something wrong with Rafe's bald head.
I look like Ray Allen.
They say death catches up to everyone. He can certainly try.
Is such a perfect line for Speedy Gonzalez. The dialogue are not just funny and quirky, but also generally gives depth, nuance, and charisma to these characters. Another way the cast express themselves is through the dialogue in the middle of the match. Sometimes they react to the things that are happening in the match, responding to someone's ping, or when you have a specific team combination, dialogue just gets naturally different. For example, LOBA and Valkyrie just intensely flirt with each other during the match,
Can't leave something this precious behind.
Which always made me wonder how the third member of the team felt about being in the middle of that. When you ping a grenade with Mad Maggie, she starts taking the piss on Fuse, who has special abilities with grenades,
Grenade here. Perfect for cowards who won't fight up close. Hey, Wally.
and call him a coward for playing at the distance, as Maggie has a passive ability with shotguns, close corner guns, which is a really cool way to represent their lore and complicated relationship through natural gameplay sense.
Judging by this, your survival decades ago was a scientific anomaly.
Or when Horizon and Ash are in the same team, and how they are both seconds away to throw hands with each other because, Ash tried to kill Horizon when she was a human 100 years ago, but Horizon survived with the power of the black hole. Yeah, I'm not going to talk a lot about lore here. I mostly care about the interaction, the dialogues, the relationship, and not so much about the ongoing drama or villains, but it's fun to read through some of the game's stories and comments from time to time. Point is, through these fun lines and the amazing voice acting in this game, by the way, these characters really come to life. And I do think the game makes a good job in connecting their personality with gameplay. The character design, now when it comes to their abilities and such, it's interesting because their skills and abilities aren't like a fun button. They don't do a lot by themselves like other hero shooters. I like to see their powers more like conveniences, ways to cheat through the game. Everyone has a ability, a passive ability, and a ultimate ability, which lets them, let us say, have a little bonus, bend the level to their favor. But they have a risk versus reward value to them, as basically every ability in the game you can activate can be used against you, or you have some sort of cost by using it. And that, alongside just how vague and flexible some powers can be, you can really use each one of them in very different situations for different goals. You can feel that learning curve in understanding the character, and through every mistake you make, you feel like it was a mistake on your part that you can learn with, and in a way, better act like the character that you are playing with. For example, Octane is a simple man. He likes to show off, he likes to fight, he likes the fame. So his cooldown ability is this thing that does nothing more than make you go faster. That actually don't have any cooldown, but it decreases his health because he's an idiot who constantly puts himself in danger. So he's just like everyone who plays him. Seer is an empath. He can see the future, so his passive ability is able to predict if there is an enemy in the vicinity and be prepared before the fight even starts. And Caustic is an evil genius, so he has this poison trap that can be very easily placed, thrown, and activated. So the game incentivizes you to be creative in how you place them in the middle of a fight, just like an evil genius. It's not any news to the gaming world, as basically every fighting game does this, but I just love how their gameplay represents their personalities. Now, you know what else represents them really well? Well, representation. So when talking about representation in video games, I think it's still pretty fair to say that we are distant of the excitable, especially when it comes to the AAA big budget games. But I think, from recent memory, Apex Legends is one of the most inclusive games I've ever seen, at least with its popularity. Like, this is the game with the least amount of white characters I've ever seen. Half of this cast is people of color, and I guess 1/8 is robots. French, Australian, Scottish, Caribbean, Hawaiian, Japanese, Korean, Indian, African, Mexican, Brazilian. L, you got it. G, you got it. B, you got it. T, you got it. Plus, you got it. Autistics, fat, deficient, MILF, you got it. And you know, one of the cool things about representation that we don't really talk about all that much is that they cannot serve just to satisfy the needs of us, the people who are usually not very well represented in media, but they can also enrich that said media. How they look, how they express themselves verbally and physically, how they think, how they act. This is one of the coolest things about our world, isn't it? The fact that we humans are very similar to each other, but in the way how we express those feelings of ours are so much different from each other. And in a way, I think Apex Legends kinda gets that. As I mentioned, it is not a home run here. There hasn't been any fat character ever since the release of the game. Gibraltar himself lacks a little bit in the writing department, if I do say so myself. I saw some people saying how they felt a little bit uncomfortable due to the depiction of Watson's ADHD, with people saying that she acted a little bit more childish than actually autistic. And believe me, I can nitpick LOBA's Brazilianness all day. And, you know, look at this picture of the studio. There are obviously some white people that can get the situation and make a good job. I say that I think they kinda did it. But this is also why we should start hiring and paying attention to people of color and other minorities in the gaming industry. Obviously, so people like us can survive, first and foremost, but also because our experience and our views of the world can be so much different and make art and media so much richer. However, as I mentioned, I think they did a mostly good job. Lots of people being represented, a clear effort to try to depict them right here. Their colors and their genders are not the only thing that these characters have going for them, and I think this should be the field for the whole industry and Respawn themselves to actually go even forward with their representation. Or maybe not, because they already made the best character ever made.
I'm looking for someone special to take out.
LOBA is such a perfect fucking character, oh my god. Amazing design, her gameplay that fits me like a glove, her myriad of great lines, an extremely interesting backstory, protagonist of one of the best seasons of the game, one of the best representations I ever saw for my country. Pretty good, but not perfect as I said. The amazing voice acting by Frida Wolf, and she is one of the best takes of sexy characters in media. One which doesn't feel like an sexist attempt of marketing, but actually comes down as a creative decision with a lot of wit and respect to the people she's trying to represent. She's basically at the same tier of other favorites of all time characters of mine. By that I mean she's going to have her own video one day. Now, I want to talk about some mechanics and features that, though small in the grand scheme of things, is still pretty important to the overall Apex experience. For example, do I even need to talk about the movement here? It is not as frenetic as Titanfall 2, but it balances really well to the people that like some verticality, speed, crazy tech, but also if you're a simpler boots on the ground player. And the combination between these two styles is very seamless, usually depending on the character that you play. We have the Evil Shield. Every player in the match will start with an armor, and after you do enough damage to enemies, that armor will upgrade to a new level and increase the player's maximum health. Another great idea that I wonder how did I even play this game before it. The game basically rewards your aggressiveness, which is a tricky thing to do right in BR as the genre naturally rewards a very defensive playstyle. And make sure that most probably in the end game you'll be at the same level as the final teams. We have also a crafting system, which allows you to craft different attachments, items, and even guns depending on the season, in rotation by a currency you get mid-match. But healing items, ammo, and some levels of the evil shield can be obtained permanently, meaning that with a bit of patience and exploration of the level, you can better prepare a loadout of your preference. Survival items are a small but cool addition, at the moment consisting of two items. The mobile respawn beacon, as the name implies, you can just res your teammate anywhere, and the heat shield that protects you against the storm for a few seconds. Great items in case you get unlucky in the match. You have beacons that show you where the next ring will be if you're playing with a character from the Recon class. Jump towers, tridents, phase shifts, and gravity cannons allows for great mobilities in the maps, cutting a lot of those moments of silence and making you engage with enemies more constantly. Also helps that with a lot of those elements, I find the balance of the game to be good, for the most part. Something about the battle royales and the element of surprise that is naturally implanted on them can make some underused weapons and characters really have their time to shine more often compared to other shooters. There is, and there always will be, a better weapon and a better character, but it never feels impossible to win or have a satisfying performance with the least popular ones. Also, by the way, how in the world an EA game has one of the least offensive and oppressive microtransactions I've ever seen in a video game? Prices a little bit higher than I would like, and there's still quite a couple of really cool things that you can only get through real life money, but this game offers a lot of different items that are possible to buy by just playing the game with some frequency. There's definitely some that are a good grind. You can only buy a new character every 20 levels. I remember as well it took me from 3 to 5 months grinding to get the LOBA kill can, but you can, and some with relative ease. Compare this to Fortnite or Paladins back in the day. I played both for a year and a half and I still don't have anything really. Obviously, these are free games. The studio not only needs but deserves to get some money in some sort of way. But I don't feel oppressed by it. I don't feel like the only way to express myself is kept behind money. And I think that is a really important part that free to play games should strive to balance it better. And I think the way how Respawn decided to express the player is really cool because of the banners. You can change the frame, the pose of your character, your badges that can only be obtained by playing the game, so there are actual badges of honor, the trackers, the Q champion quip. The game gives you so many ways to express yourself and to express the character and their nuance through posing and dialogue. You can see the banner in the lobby, in the start of the match, on the death box, or obviously at the big panels that makes you feel like a girl boss. And as a way to both give more personality to the character and to make a ton of money, they created the heirlooms, basically a uniquely cosmetic item that your character holds that changes almost all of their hand animations. In a creative mindset, this is a way to express even more character now that they can actually animate each move with that personality in mind, and also serves as a prestige item, proving that you invested a lot of hours and, more importantly, money into this game. It could be easier to get, but it's alright. The menu and how it changes through the seasons is pretty cool. I love how that grid, that populated UI I talked about earlier, also extends to the lobby. Audio is quite a tricky thing to talk about in Apex for reasons I'll get into later, but I do think the audio department does a good job. The bells when you kill a team, the impactful stomp when you are the kill leader,
Recharging shields.
and when you pick guns in this game, mwah. There are probably more that I'm forgetting right now. Honestly, this game has so much stuff more stuff than you probably should have, but I don't really have a problem with excessiveness in video games. Throw at me literally every mechanic possible at once, and as long as you keep it fun, I will keep learning and having fun. Now let's talk about something that's not fun. I do think it's fair now to talk about some problems that Apex Legends has. It is absolutely not perfect, and there are some things that should be better implemented or worked upon in general. Apex's biggest L, and if you play the game, you probably noticed that I didn't even talk about arenas, and that is because they were extremely underwhelming for me. In paper, excellent idea. Picking out the characters, guns, abilities, and gameplay design of Apex, but implementing on a 3v3 battle without RNG, without picking up guns, just pure fight. This mode sucks. It's honestly baffling just how bad this is. Like, bad in every possible way that you could. Removing the BR aspects and consequently the elements of surprise kinda highlights the worst parts of Apex. If a character is fine in BR, it is trash in Arena. If a gun is good in BR, it is trash in Arena. I feel like a Bangalore or a Rampart can really just slightly break this mode. I feel like they are easily the best options. This mode is very consistent, so consistent it becomes repetitive and boring because it is very bare bones. Not a lot of things go around in a fight, and the maps are a bit small. That loses that complexity, that element of surprise that was so integral to the core Apex experience. And as a more arcadey, more get in and get out mode where you don't have that stress of BR, it does a bad job because this is structured as a CSGO or Valorant type of match, where if you die, you only come back at the next round, and poking and such becomes very important because, you know, that's the type of game that the respawn fans love. Arenas have a worth in the way that they are perfect for you to train your aim and feel more comfortable with some gameplay elements and whatnot. But it is so frustrating with a bad matchmaking and just feels very unrewarding to play at the end of the day. In Season 12 Defiance, they were experimenting with the control LTM, which is basically what Arena should have been. 9v9, 3 points to control, you respawn every 6 seconds while still maintaining a lot of the satisfying core Apex gameplay. My biggest wish for the future is that Respawn basically deletes arenas, make control the new permanent mode, and remake the arenas map to be more in touch with the control ones. Then honestly, this game would get even better. As much as I do like the balance of the game, I do feel like Respawn can take a good while to update some things in this game. In this specific case, like the minor things, the patch notes. Ramparts took a full year pretty much to actually feel acceptable to exist in the same game as Gibraltar. Crypto is still very hard to consistently gain worth out of him. As I mentioned before, it is absolutely possible to have fun and win a lot of matches with the weakest options, but it's definitely a struggle, a grind. It's very easy to just give up and play something easier instead, especially just how long they take to actually change things. Matchmaking is inconsistent to say the least. I don't think it's as bad as people make it out to be, but it's definitely something that exists and that it is bothersome. In the day I'm writing the script, yesterday I was playing with people with those 20 kills 4k damage badges and I was playing very well, and today I played with people on level 100 and I didn't pass the 7-minute mark in any match. Though I do actually have an interesting story about, matchmaking, which was the following. I actually believed for one moment that I reached the point of Apex being unplayable because of the matchmaking, because I was just losing every match I got onto for like a month straight. I was getting very frustrated. I was feeling like I was playing with people who were worse than me. It was hell. But then I noticed something. I was actually playing with this controller. This controller was fixed in a wrong way, in which its like left right analog was much more sensible than the my other controller. So I was basically playing with 2 times my sensibility and I was not noticing. So when I started to play with this controller, the matchmaking suddenly was fixed. I wonder why. There's still some functionality I think it's missing in Apex because example of them all is a kill cam. I just want to know how I died so I have a better understanding of what I did wrong and how the opponents got to me. But no, you just have that history of the damage you took before being knocked. I also think a replay match feature should be here. Once again, not only do I have a better understanding of myself, but it's also just fun to look how you won the match on your enemy's perspective. Hop-ups should be rewarded, like from the moment they were born. It's really cool, the idea of this item that gives your gun special priorities, changing quite fundamentally how you approach gunfights, but they are so hard to come by. You have to find the right gun, then find a hop-up, most of them being purple or gold, meaning that they are somewhat rare, and then that hop-up needs to be the one you're looking for. It's basically luck, and I hate how the addition of one barely changes the game. Every time people will try to defend that this hop up will make this gun meta or this gun meta, but it never goes because hop up is a bad idea. They should commit to that idea of making an item called hop up, then it transforms to the hop up your gun has space for, or make some of them permanently craftable. I'm still a little torn as to why they're removing some movement tech in the game. It's never a good look, but also I do understand where they're coming from, as managing how movement and traversal works in your battle royale game is very important because it dictates the flow and pacing of a match, which in a BR game is very fragile. The tech may be fun to do, but for example, it may increase the probability of a third party because you're moving faster than originally intended. So I don't feel comfortable criticizing, but also I don't feel comfortable in just accepting it. Almost the same thing goes for all that discussion of the controller aim assist against the mouse and keyboard things, and how the ranked points worked or something. A lot of people have very strong opinions on these subjects, but I will not really talk about them here because I don't experience that side of the game all that much. I play on a PlayStation 4 against other controller gamers, and the only advanced tech I do is just spamming the slide button and dodging sometimes. And that's kinda it, so if you wanna have a more in-depth discussion about these topics, I feel like you're probably going to find someone on the internet better than me, honestly. I would argue that the kill leader is kind of an underworked feature. Really nice to know you are the player with the most kills in a match, and especially if you end up the match as one, as the next one will show your banner. But that's it. You are given a reward, but it's really hard to know and recognize a kill leader, and at some point you will have so many things happening in one match that killing the kill leader becomes a tertiary priority. The doors, man, they can be so inconsistent. Doors are a very powerful defense system in this game. Healing behind a door is a common strat here, but they can open out of the blue, like you're holding one that still can open and you may die. It's kind of frustrating. And to finish things off, this game is very buggy and has a lot of server issues, more than the usual AAA large service game usually have. Honestly, I don't mind some of them as much, but others, like starting a match with -1 player or some enemies not having sound, can really do a damage to morale. It's important to mention that even though these bugs and problems are quite bothersome, I wouldn't say they ruin the greatness that this game is, especially on its best moments.
on! Let's fucking go!
Apex Legends is just that awesome. So let's talk about why you're wrong. First off, no, you guys are not wrong. This is a joke. Some people can only take a joke if they come in the mouth of a robot in the Respawn community. If you ask my motivation as to why I'm making this video, or other videos of mine, or of my channel, or of my existence, is to share passionate opinions about things that I feel are under-discussed, I guess you could say. So you might imagine my surprise when I was playing one of the best multiplayer games I've ever played, having so much love and respect towards this title and their developers, and seeing everybody feeling the exact opposite. Apex is nowhere unpopular. This game is worth a couple $1 billion, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, but it's still so hard to find that love in the overall gaming conversation that is an apathy or worse, disdain over the fact the game even exists. But let's go step by step. First step, it's obvious that this game and Respawn in general is overshadowed by their creation, Titanfall 2. What was once a well-received but flopped FPS game suddenly in the last couple of years has become one of the most beloved games I've ever seen. To the point that the Titanfall community, and honestly a good part of the gaming community as a whole, can be very dismissive towards Apex. Some people really just see it as a slower, boring, streamer-friendly version of TF, and not as its own unique thing. There's absolutely no problem whatsoever in not liking Apex, in preferring Titanfall. As I mentioned, it's a Battle Royale, and Battle Royale is a niche. But to a point where nobody talks about its strengths and the very cool ideas and design philosophies that they had, and in the worst case scenarios, simply hate it because it's not the game they wanted. This is very easy to find, just how many people just detest Apex because they think its sheer existence basically impedes the development of a Titanfall 3. It's kind of crazy actually, just how Respawn is like working on 5 different games, one of them stated to be a highly movement shooter, but people are still not satisfied because it is not Titanfall 3. And I think these people are just throwing a pity fest, and they're absolutely right in do such. However, I feel like we are, in a way, missing the point or doing these complaints in a way that I feel it's wrong. First off, I understand that feeling. Do you guys want to know what one of my favorite games of all time is? Skate 3. Skate 3 is an amazing game that is pretty popular and sold really well and proved that Black Box was a very smart and competent studio, and it died. And not because there was a live service game called Roller Skaters, no, it was because Black Box responded to EA. And EA is a vile capitalistic company. And you know what a vile capitalist company wants? Money? No. They want infinite money. Why make a single player game that you can sell a good quantity of copies of if you can just make a live service game and have that same amount of money each and every week? Point is, I do think we villainize, I don't know how to say that word, Respawn Entertainment a lot, and obviously they can make some bad decisions, so much so that they did and continue to do such. But not only do I think Respawn took more good decisions than bad decisions, sometimes the good ones completely outshining the latter. But also, I don't like being this aggressive and cold towards a studio I think has been consistently great towards their output, and very open in terms of communication. In every decision, I don't know when Respawn ends and EA begins. Issues in Apex, like the bugs or the server issues, or more general things like the lack of a Titanfall 3 and the development of 5 different games. I can't imagine being a decision by the same people who created LOBA. Who wouldn't want to improve the game that they already have? Who wouldn't want to make an ambitious grand finale to a beloved franchise? But it is not Respawn that decides it. It's EA. And I will personally take it as EA being responsible for most problems in this game. Because from one side we have a professional, experienced and critically acclaimed studio that made 3 of the most influential games of the genre in 1 decade. And in the other side, we have a company that was for some years saw as the antagonist of the gaming industry, which was infamous for taking good studios and ruining them with their awkward, stupid objectives. Who do you think I'm going to put the blame on? Respawn have a set date that you can even see on the game itself when the next season will start. So basically they have to be pumping and making enough content for a bombastic Apex season every 3 months. Just imagine how much this affects development priority. How will they solve all those issues if they're still trying to put enough content out there? But they have billions of dollars. They could hire so much people and have access to so much resources. Apex is worth billions of dollars, and you can't see that at all. And not because the Respawn devs are lazy or greedy, like who in a creative mindset wouldn't like to waste all their money into their creation? No, I actually bet $10 somebody on Respawn Entertainment is actually underpaid. But all of that money doesn't go to the game. It doesn't go to the studio, it doesn't go to the developers, it goes to the people at the top of the company. Because that's capitalism. The objective is to make the more money possible, wasting as little money possible. Respawn made some bad decisions, of course, but I feel some of the problems are more structural than just being a bad studio decision. So it bothers me to see the fanbase have so much of this black and white view of the situation. It's absolutely fine to not know how the industry works and have complaints about the game. You do not need to know how the gaming industry works. But there's so much childish rage and vague criticism in the Apex community that doesn't add anything to the conversation. That creates this well of poison in the entire community that makes talking about something marvelous something miserable. The way how toxic and obnoxious the Apex community is reminds me of the Overwatch fandom, and of the Halo fandom, and of Valorant, and of Fortnite, and of PUBG, and of Hyperscape, and of Valorant, and of Genshin Impact, and of Destiny, and of Team Fortress, and of League of Legends, and of Dead by Daylight, and of Rocket League. Huh. Is there some sort of theme here? I find it bizarre just how much it happens of the fandom of this live service game just becomes a pit of hatred, self-loathing, and how we form these toxic relationships with these games. Is it because we associate ourselves so much with the game that when we start to underperform or when the developers start to be underwhelming, our overall self-esteem takes a toll? Is it because their constant presence in our lives serves as substitute for something that is or isn't there? Is it because late capitalist companies are pushing the idea that engagement is everything, so they constantly create features with a lot of FOMO interactions and FOMO things in general, and you have to keep interacting with it even when you're not comfortable with the game anymore because you fear losing the cool thing? I know that I'm sounding very like, oh, we live in a society. But after some years of seeing the same thing over and over and over again, I do believe some of these problems are more structural or, in a way, planned to happen. Which is what bothers me so much about the criticism that Respawn gets, because it lacks depth, it lacks reflection upon the industry, upon the development, upon the gamer itself. Oh, but this problem has been happening for years and they still didn't fix it. Fair, but why do you think that is? Yes, maybe they don't know how to solve it, but maybe they could hire someone to solve it, or they could have more time so that they could solve it. But they don't have that benefit, because proactively trying to solve an issue is common sense. And who lacks common sense? The people at the top of a big company. It's up to EA if they think that the time is worth it or not. If EA think it's more worth it to make another event with just selling cosmetics than actually fixing the problems, then that's EA. Respawn don't have much to say about that. Oh, but I paid for the season pass and I'm not having enough time to complete it because it's constantly bugging you. Fair. Perfect. So your problem is with the season pass. Season pass is such a bad idea. Like, you have to pay to get the things, but then you have to play to get the things. And if you paid for the thing and have not played enough of the thing, you don't get the things. It sucks. This is one of the most popular FOMO features in gaming nowadays. You have to be constantly engaging with the game to get the cool reward, because these rewards will be gone from the game, or will just very randomly and rarely come back to the store. Which means that a lot of content that the developers created on this game is indefinitely lost to time. Make season passes permanent, and give us the options to choose which season pass we want to buy. It's literally the best of both worlds. And if you disagree with that because you have a bunch of cosmetics from years ago and you give worth to them because they are rare and nobody can get anymore, fuck you, and go look for things that actually have worth in life. Hey, but with the server issues, I won't be able to achieve the new ranked mode in time. Does that matter? I will repeat. Does that matter? But hey, I'm glad that you mentioned it. So, I think this is a good time to talk about it. But first, I think some of you guys need to hear about this, alright? The ranked mode doesn't matter. Trying back to those matters that I talked about, toxic relationships in communities, I do feel like that toxicity starts in the competitive scene of that particular game, or at least on the min-max conversations about it. Speaking this because I've experienced it, this min-max, very competitive mindset that you can have on any game can just ruin your mind, really. Nowadays, every slightly strategic PvP game can be considered an esport, and the ranked mode can make us simple gamers feel like athletes. But we pass through the same stress, but not the same rewards. Games nowadays already comes out with a ranked mode, with a competitive mode. And in that mode you have to put your most serious game face on. You have to pay attention to everything, and everything, every little thing matters. And here's the thing, right? Because when you're an athlete, when you work with a game, when you work with anything really, is that you will have some sacrifices. The appeal of that work will be lost to time. Because what you felt strong about it will be kind of taken for granted, and every little problem will be accentuated the more serious you start taking that thing. That is why I barely talked about Apex in a competitive sense, or at least addressing some complaints that some pro players or streamers have of Apex, because they're basically already at another world than I am. So I feel like each bubble, the competitive or the casual ones, should respect each other, but I don't feel like one should comment on the other because those are very distinct ways to see the same game. However, ranked mode is not just for the pro players, it's for everyone. Which means that those small problems starts being accentuated because so many people, more people than it should have perhaps, starts noticing them and starts having problems with them. So obviously, if there's a problem, that problem should be fixed independent of how small or how old it is. But thing is, you can't solve all problems at once very quickly. You have to prioritize. You have to know which one really matters to you so that you can know what to solve, what is ruining the experience to you. But the problem with competitive is that so many people will have so many different problems with things so small that that brings that toxicity that talked about, that suddenly this game sucks because they didn't solve or they didn't change this extremely small thing in the end of the day. One of the things that I think really adds to it is the ranked points, which so many people usually have the problem to associate their self-worth, their fun with those points, with how much reward they are getting at the end of the match. That puts you in a really bad place. You feel like you're underperforming, whatever that may mean in a casual sense. I had that thing happen to me, with Overwatch. I had this very competitive mentality to it. I didn't really think Overwatch is a bad game, but I do feel like the game nowadays seems much worse to me because I took it very seriously, more seriously than I probably should have. Because in the end of the day, those points that I experience won't add to nothing really. 1% of the people that plays these games are actually going to work with it, either by being streamers or by, being pro players. Like, most of us shouldn't care about these problems. And if you start caring, then it becomes a pit of hatred and toxicity very quickly. So when I saw myself becoming quite invested in Apex Legends, I made a promise that I wouldn't be invested in this game in a more competitive sense because I've already seen it, that same chaos and self-hatred happen so many times that I didn't want it to happen again. Apex Legends is now my favorite multiplayer game. But not interacted with this secondary mode wouldn't just be ignorance towards the entire second half of this game? Well, I don't believe such. Rather, this matter actually depends on how much do you think the competitive scene is important to that game. Apex does have a populated competitive scenario, but I don't feel like it is as integral to the overall Apex experience, to the overall Apex conversation, as much as a Valorant or as a Yu-Gi-Oh is, you know? And seeing how ranked mode barely gives you rewards, and I have so much fun with the game playing only pubs for 2 years by now, I feel like the competitive scene of Apex Legends is as big as you wanted to see it. I'm getting tired, as I guess you guys noted, so let's get the conclusion out of the way. Putting the last miscellaneous considerations here, I don't want to implicate here that I know you more than you know yourself. I don't want to have a higher moral ground than others in this video. But what I want you to do is to reflect upon yourself and how you see video games. Live service games are being sold to us as hobbies. They want to constantly experience these games in many different ways throughout our lives. And just like hobbies, you have to take care of yourself. You have to control, have to manage how much do you want to invest in this game, both in terms of skill and time, so that those toxic relationship does not form. As I implied, this is a big thing of why I like Apex. I just feel like I have a better relationship to it than I had to most other multiplayer games that I've played. I feel like the Apex community is the worst kind of obsessed. I really don't like the Apex community because they're really the type of obsessed that pisses me off a lot, because they're this type of people that the game constantly have to have content. It constantly have to have new things, to be changing, to be adding more things. And I hate that. I disagree with that to the very core. Not only is that just not easy and people clearly don't know how the game developing works, but also I don't believe like the game just being kinda chill and kind of repetitive for a couple months to be bad. Hear me out. Maybe a game just having a good and replayable gameplay loop and just having some cool progression systems here and there is enough to make the game good. Crazy, right? And you know what more? If you are tired of the game, you can just quit for a couple days or even weeks, and that's not a shame on the game, neither on you. Maybe having a bunch of crazy but shallow events and gameplay features that are just there to call attention is actually just a strategy for a game to continue to sell and hide the fact that its gameplay is actually garbage and weak. But what do I know? To be fair and to provide some counterpoints to this video, I don't find Respawn to be a weird company. While I'm still very confident on these opinions and guesses of what happens behind the scenes, it wouldn't be a lie the fact that Respawn is the EA studio with the most freedom out of all of their most popular ones. There are still some big L's that were pushed by the studio which pays more than the average in the market, studio which is currently working on 6 games at the same time, even though most of the professional developers that made the first Titanfall games are now quitting. What these things means exactly is unknown. It's very easy to point out and say that this proves the mess that is Respawn, but also moves like this are very common in the industry at large, so take it as you will, I guess. And Titanfall 3 will happen. There's no way it's not going to happen. EA seems to be pulling some old IPs nowadays. Titanfall is very beloved. I think it's very easy and I think it's going to happen. And remember, even if Apex Legends didn't exist, we still wouldn't have Titanfall 3 by the Skate 3 example that I gave. I feel like a lot of people, part of the gaming journalism, like some outlets and such, likes to put one against the other, and that pisses me off a lot. Obviously, the comparison can be brought by the studio itself. You know, Apex still is in the same universe with some of the same characters in the same engine. But let me say this. Apex and Titanfall barely having things in common. If you try to look one in the other, you're just going to be disappointed. Which is why both of them should be able to coexist. I want a bombastic new season of Apex just as much as I want a new Titanfall game. The two of those are able to coexist, and they should, and there's no reason as to why not to. But as it stands, Apex Legends is awesome. Picking such a interesting but flawed genre and gives so much thought, attention, and charisma with its presentation, with its gameplay. There's genuinely so much here to love, even with the bad things that also come with it. But at the end of the day, I still love Apex Legends. And you fuckers don't talk about it.